The movie began with a note saying that sisu is a Finnish word that cannot be translated. It means a white-knuckled form of courage and unimaginable determination. Sisu manifests itself when all hope is lost. After this, the movie shifted to 1944, a time when World War II was going on. We heard a man's voice explaining that the Second World War was about to come to an end. Finland and the Soviet Union had signed a pact called the Moscow Armistice, which decreed that Finland must drive them out of Lapland. The Nazis adopted a scorched earth tactic and destroyed all roads, bridges, villages, and towns in their path. Deep in the wilderness of Lapland, there was a man who had left the war behind him for good. After this narration, we are shown a former ruthless Finnish soldier named Atami Corpy in the vast plains of Lapland, collecting gold from the water of a ravine with his small white dog. Corpy was on cloud 9 after hitting upon a massive source of gold. He dug a large pit, hoping to find more gold beneath the ground, while his horse was tied to a nearby stake. Corpy sat by a bonfire to keep himself warm as Nazi fighter jets roared overhead. At that time, German forces had devastated Finland and had almost taken it over. Sometime later, Corpy resumed his pursuit of gold, continuing to dig the pit. Suddenly, he heard an explosion nearby and climbed out of the pit to patrol the area with his rifle. From a distance, he saw the Nazis ravaging his country, blowing up everything in their path. Corpy ground his teeth, but remained calm and composed. He returned and resumed his search for gold underground. After many days of grueling hard work, he struck a massive reserve of gold buried beneath the earth. Corpy was completely overwhelmed and could hardly believe his eyes when his hard work finally paid off. He carried the gold into his cabin and sat there, staring at it. Later, he took a shower in freezing water. We are shown that Corpy's body was deeply bruised and scarred with several wounds, possibly sustained during his time in the Finnish forces. Afterward, he loaded the bags of gold onto his horse and set off for the city. On his way, he came across a troop of Nazi soldiers. A Nazi soldier named Wolf stepped off the vehicle and climbed onto a tank, glaring continuously at Corpy. Bruno, the leader of the troop, also stared at him, but Corpy did not look away and stared back as he continued riding. Wolf moved to kill Corpy, but Bruno stopped him, remarking that Corpy was already riding toward his death. Along the way, Corpy encountered several Finnish soldiers hanging from posts and electrical poles. He brushed it off and continued his journey. Soon enough, he ran into another group of Nazi soldiers patrolling the area. One of the heartless soldiers ordered Corpy to get off the horse and demanded to know where he was heading, claiming there was nothing ahead since everything had already been destroyed. The soldier then searched Corpy's belongings on the horse and found gold inside the bags. Mistaking Corpy for a simple gold miner, the soldier began to harass him, unaware that Corpy had once been a ruthless Finnish commando. Corpy signaled his dog to rush into the wilderness so that he could show the ignorant Nazi soldiers who they were dealing with.
Get down on your knees. Get down on your knees, Grandpa! Thank you!
Corpy killed all the patrolling soldiers and continued on his way to the city. Meanwhile, Bruno and his troops arrived at the scene in a tank after hearing continuous gunfire. They found their soldiers lying dead on the ground. Bruno stepped off the tank and approached a dying soldier, from whom he retrieved a piece of gold. At once, he realized who must have massacred his men. Corpy turned around and saw that the Nazis were coming after him, so he rode off straight away, prompting Bruno to open fire. However, Corpy managed to escape the volley of bullets, though he had a close call when his horse accidentally stepped on a landmine buried by the Nazi forces. Corpy lost his only means of transport and mourned as his horse was brutally killed in the explosion. Hearing the approaching Nazi tanks and trucks, Corpy desperately tried to recover his gold beforehand. However, he couldn't do it in time, and the Nazi forces led by Bruno arrived at the scene. Bruno saw Corpy collecting the gold and realized that he had been right about the massacre of his soldiers. Wolf loaded his rifle, but Bruno stopped him once again. Corpy stealthily picked up a stone, hoping it would come in handy. He bagged his gold and stared Bruno in the eyes. Bruno didn't like it and ordered Wolf to blow Corpy's head off, but Corpy outsmarted them by throwing the stone onto a landmine, creating a shield of dust and smoke. Bruno and Wolf climbed down from the tank and peered into the thick smoke. Bruno then ordered one of his soldiers to go and check whether Corpy was dead. Reluctantly, the soldier advanced into the smoke, but was blown apart when a landmine was hurled at him by Corpy. Determined to capture Corpy alive and snatch his gold, Bruno sent 2 more soldiers after him, but they met the same fate. Bruno then ordered Wolf to bring 2 Finnish women along with some rope. While inspecting his fallen soldiers, Bruno found an insignia belonging to Corpy lying on the ground. Wolf obeyed his orders and returned with the 2 captured Finnish women. Bruno got the Finnish women tied together with a rope around their waists, forcing them to walk ahead of the tanks and trucks in order to save themselves from being blown apart by landmines spread across the plains. Wolf was informed over the phone by a Nazi general about Atomic Corpy. Wolf then told Bruno that the general had ordered them to turn back and head to Norway from Finland immediately. Bruno then asked Wolf whether he had informed the general that Corpy had killed 7 of their soldiers. Wolf said yes and told him that the general thought they were lucky. Wolf explained that the insignia they had found belonged to Atomic Corpy, a Finnish commando who was the most feared in his unit. The general said that Atomic Corpy was the one nefarious man no one wanted to mess with. He had fought in the Winter War, during which he lost his home and family to the Russians. He became a ruthless, vengeful soldier who took orders from no one. The Finns eventually gave up trying to discipline or control him, so they sent him alone into the wilderness to hunt Russian patrols. He became a one-man death squad, killing over 300 Russian soldiers. As a result, the Russians gave him the name Koshai, the Immortal.
They call him Koshai.
Despite the chilling warning from the general, Bruno refused to turn back from Finland, saying that the gold Corpy possessed was their way out. Corpy took shelter beneath a wrecked vehicle while still holding onto his gold. He noticed that he had been struck by a bullet in the leg during an encounter with the Nazis, so he took a knife and pulled the bullet from his wound. Meanwhile, somewhere in the plains, Corpy's dog rushed back to where he had last seen his master, but the pitiable animal could not find him and began to whine. Corpy was asleep when the Nazis began searching for him with their German Shepherd dogs. Before long, he woke up to the barking and hid beneath a wrecked truck. Before the dogs could locate him, Corpy swiftly crawled under a Nazi truck and ruptured its fuel tank, causing gasoline to spill onto the ground. This misled the dogs, and seizing the opportunity, he emerged from hiding and dashed into the plains, prompting Wolf to shoot him in the leg. Bruno ordered the dogs to be released on the limping Corpy, but Corpy had his own plan to escape. Wolf fired at Corpy just as he surfaced from the water. Soon, the water turned red. Bruno ordered his soldiers to retrieve the gold from underwater. One soldier dove in, but had his throat slit by the lurking Corpy. Moments later, the water turned even redder, shaking the rest of the squad with fear. Bruno ordered another terrified soldier to dive in and bring him the gold. The frightened man reluctantly obeyed and dove into the water to finish what his predecessor could not. However, he met the same fate and died underwater. Seeing this, the last soldier refused to obey Bruno's orders and attempted to flee, prompting Bruno to command Wolf to shoot him immediately. Using the corpse of the soldier as a shield, Corpy managed to flee the scene in the teeth of open fire from Wolf. Shortly afterward, Corpy's dog tracked him down and arrived at the river. Bruno saw this as an opportunity to reach Corpy and ordered Wolf to get him a boat. On his way to the city, Corpy came across a town engulfed in flames and broke down upon witnessing the pathetic condition of his own country. However, he continued his journey, carrying bags of gold on his back. He discovered a battered gas station and decided to spend the night inside. Corpy woke up to a noise coming from outside, so he stepped out of the gas station and immediately began to run, realizing that a pack of dogs was approaching him. However, there was nothing to worry about as it was Corpy's own dog, but the relief vanished when he noticed a bomb tied to the dog. Corpy quickly untied the bomb and threw it away just in time. Despite surviving the blast, he had a close call and lost consciousness. Moments later, Bruno and Wolf arrived at the scene and hanged Corpy with a rope. Bruno placed a piece of gold in Corpy's hand and walked away with the rest, assuming him to be dead. Corpy struggled desperately to free himself but failed. He then rested his body weight on an iron rod that had pierced through his leg. Corpy's dog had survived the explosion and stood beneath his hanging body. At dawn, a fighter jet flew past the gas station at high speed, causing the rod to tilt downward. This loosened the rope, allowing Corpy to fall to the ground. Sometime later, 2 Nazi soldiers arrived in search of fuel. They spotted a man lying tied on the ground. Intrigued, one of the soldiers approached Corpy and identified him instantly. He informed his companion, who casually suggested killing Corpy and his dog together, unaware that something terrible was about to happen to them. Realizing that his gold had been stolen, Corpy grew furious and decided to reclaim it from Bruno. Later, he cauterized his wound and stitched it up while a captured German soldier, tied to a log, watched in stunned silence. Meanwhile, Bruno prepared to leave Finland with the bags of gold, abandoning the rest of his squad. Along the way, the convoy found the road blocked by a crashed helicopter. Wolf and another soldier inspected it and discovered a hanged German pilot inside. Wolf noticed that the pilot had been hanged with the same rope they had used on Corpy, leaving Bruno visibly shaken. Sensing danger, Bruno immediately ordered his soldiers to evacuate the area. They rushed back into their armed vehicles and began to retreat. One soldier remarked that Corpy seemed to be back, which brought smiles to the faces of the captured Finnish women inside one of the trucks. The troop leader noticed Aino smiling and asked her why. Aino replied by asking whether he truly believed they had succeeded where hundreds of Russians had failed. She explained that they would soon see what happened when everything was taken from a man like Corpy. She said Corpy was a man who never gave up and refused to die, which was why the Finns had a word for him, one that could not be translated. Aino warned him that he and his company were about to be doomed. The troop leader laughed it off. At that very moment, another soldier was shot dead. As the troop leader panicked and moved to investigate, Corpy plunged an axe into his chest and dragged him out of the truck, where he was crushed beneath a tank. Corpy climbed into the truck and armed the Finnish women. He then killed a truck driver by stabbing him in the head. Aino took control of the vehicle and later shot another driver. Corpy climbed onto Bruno's tank and began tearing open its hatch. Instead of confronting Corpy himself, Bruno ordered Wolf to deal with him. Suddenly, the tank lurched forward, causing Corpy to fall. Wolf emerged and opened fire. Although Wolf's plan was solid, it was not enough to outsmart Corpy. The two men fell off the tank while fighting. Instead of helping his soldier, the cocky and selfish Bruno ordered the tank driver to keep moving. Wolf begged Corpy for mercy. At that moment, two Russian soldiers arrived and recognized Corpy as Koshai. Understanding who they were facing, they chose to flee rather than confront him. Corpy spared Wolf and drove off toward Bruno's tank. Soon afterward, the Finnish women arrived and riddled Wolf's body with bullets. Bruno reached the aircraft where a pilot was waiting. He shot the tank driver without hesitation and boarded the plane. As it prepared for takeoff, Corpy arrived and drove his axe into the aircraft, clinging to it as it soared into the sky. The pilot began bleeding after being struck by a stray bullet fired by Corpy, but Bruno ordered him to keep flying until his last breath. Corpy smashed through the aircraft's floor with his axe and climbed inside. A brutal fight broke out between Corpy and Bruno over the gold. Bruno initially gained the upper hand, but Corpy ultimately emerged victorious because of his never-say-die attitude like John Cena. After killing Bruno, Corpy desperately searched for his gold and eventually found it. Meanwhile, the plane began to descend as the pilot lay dead in the cockpit. Corpy tied himself with a rope and sat at the rear of the aircraft to reduce the impact. The plane crashed into a desolate area. Elsewhere, a Finnish soldier warned his troop leader of an approaching danger. They took their positions and watched in disbelief as a German tank arrived driven by Finnish women, with a dead German soldier hanging from its barrel. When asked where they got the tank, Aino calmly replied, "From the Nazis." Corpy survived the crash and emerged from a marsh with great effort, still carrying his bags of gold. Eventually, he reached a city engulfed in smoke. He stopped at a bank, entered, and poured all the gold onto the counter, leaving the bank teller in shock. He asked her to convert it into a single large bill while she stood frozen in fear.
Seteleitä, isoja.